Hey, this is Ian from the Fourth Place. I don't think I have anybody watching live, but I'm trying to get some practice on streaming shows like this because I'm going to be doing two things really soon. You won't see much about this until things are a little bit more ready, but we're starting to tease that Heroes of Four Worlds is going to be starting. It'll be every other Saturday night. We're still finalizing the exact time. It'll be on this exact Twitch channel, which is the Fourth Place Ian. The Fourth Place is my business. Ian is the human sitting here. It's going to be a D&D campaign inspired by decades of role-playing, starting with D&D as a kid, years of LARPing, and turning that to writing. So we're going to be playing in a world that feels a lot like D&D, but has some surprises in it. And featuring four characters still to be announced from four cool friends of mine still to be announced. This is all happening because right now we're all stuck at home, and I think if we're smart, we'll try to stay at home a little bit longer. But we got to keep living our lives. And so what to me that means is that after years of playing in-person D&D with plastic dice, sometimes helped out by some digital tools like, there you go, D&D Beyond, we're all learning how to play online. And as part of that, I've been really hungry to run a game for a while, and now I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it with some of my friends online, which makes it a lot easier to find a cool crowd of people and a little bit easier to get together on time once every couple of weeks. So as part of that, I think that there's a lot of people who are interested in D&D but don't really know how to play. One of the fun things about the party that's coming up is that you've got people who've played since the early 90s, like me, people who've been playing for certainly several years, and we wanted to make sure we had one player who'd never played any tabletop role-playing before, including Dungeons & Dragons. So while I teach that player, how do I say this? The way to put it is we wanted to do it so that as the game happens, we are not forgetting to speak to people who are new to Dungeons & Dragons, or maybe who listen to or watch some of the actual play campaigns out there but haven't tried it themselves. We want to make sure that the audience we're all speaking to includes someone like some of the people we hope are watching who haven't really done it before. And alongside that, I'm going to be doing some of these little videos to teach some of the basics of Dungeons & Dragons. At first, they won't be super topical. I'm going to kind of just repeat some of the general stuff for people who are watching. Once I really get that down and we've got sort of an audience, I'll start to plan on specific topics. We haven't decided whether this is going to be on the off weeks when the game isn't running, or at some other time, or when I feel like it. All of that will get worked out long before the show launches, of course. This is really just me getting used to everything. This will look funny later on once I maybe get good at this. So, without further ado, what the heck is Dungeons & Dragons? We've seen it in Stranger Things. We've seen hints of it, if we were paying attention, in Pixar's Onward. We even saw it going all the way back to E.T., one of the first movies I saw in theaters. Dungeons & Dragons is a system to help you organize playing make-believe with your friends. I'm a LARPer too, and in LARPing you might put on a costume and go out and pretend to do the things your character does. You know, you might have to run from people dressed as goblins when it's time for the character to run from goblins. Dungeons & Dragons is called tabletop role-playing because you don't act everything out. You don't have to wear a costume. You don't have to do a voice. Some people do one or other of those things. But you do put your head in the head of a character and into an imaginary world that you share with your friends and your friends' characters. So it's make-believe, but with dice. And that sounds a lot more mathy and a lot more, and probably looks a lot more confusing there in the video than you might expect. Truth is, it's pretty simple. It's just a system to adjudicate the things that you might want to do and make it interesting, because a story where you get to do everything you want and where there's no challenges doesn't go very far. So Dungeons & Dragons is based on a few things which I've intentionally put up on the screen there. Your character has a number of statistics. They are range from 0 to 20. And the idea is that a 9 or a 10 is your average person in the real world and your average person in the game world. An 18, generally speaking, is sort of the the peak real world performance. So someone with an 18 strength is probably an Olympic athlete. And then anything above that is really people who are superhuman. Dungeons and Dragons and games like it tend to take place in worlds with magic. So the core attributes are your strength, your dexterity, your constitution, and so on. Let's go through a little bit about what they impact. Strength is your physical strength. Just like it says on the tin, if your character has a strength of a 9 or 10, you're an average person, probably like me. If your character has a strength of 18, you can probably place at the Olympics, and anything higher, people are, in the real world would be pretty shocked. But if you're a dog, you might have a strength of, 8. Physical strength. What can I lift? If I want to break something, if I want to arm wrestle. Dexterity is, physical alacrity. It's your physical dexterity. It's all of the sort of non-strength based, more, I don't want to say skill based because we'll get to that in a bit, but your speed, your reflexes, etc., all bundled into one concept. Constitution is your physical sort of stamina and health. That's how well you resist, your body resists things. Intelligence is, well, maybe you've seen memes about this, but intelligence is knowing that a tomato is technically a fruit. Wisdom is not putting it in a tomato salad, in a fruit salad. Intelligence is what you know. It's your memory. It's sort of your raw calculating power. But that's only one part of your mental strengths. Wisdom is another part of that. Wisdom is your understanding, your insight, and we'll get into something that literally is called that. And you can really think about it as sort of the softer side of your mental world. And then charisma is your force of personality, and that does include a little bit of your appearance, but it's really more about your presence and things that are related to that. So I see a character here in front of you. His name is Lost Tom. This is one that I rolled up for a past game, although you might start to see a character who's a lot like this guy in a certain upcoming game. He's average in strength. He's a little bit quick. He's a little above average in terms of his stamina. He's quite sharp. He's not extremely wise, and he has a very forceful personality. People follow what he says. People listen. This might remind you of another gray-haired wizard, and this version of him was rolled up to be a lot like that famous fellow. Now I've told you these stats. One of the things that obviously comes to mind is that you can just use these six to compare who's stronger. You get a sense of that just from the stats, but they do something else. Below them all, they have a plus, or they could have minuses. Those are related to dice rolls. So if I were rolling, actually, here's a really cool way to do this. So you get your skills. They come with a modifier, and the modifier usually goes on a d20. D20, or a 20-sided die, is the most commonly rolled die in most of the recent versions of Dungeons & Dragons, including the current version, which is called 5th edition. So when you want to make a check of any kind, it really comes down to that you're going to roll a d20. That represents the percentiles of sort of randomness and how well you do and how lucky you are in the world around you. And then these numbers underneath your scores here are the modifiers that the scores create. So, you can think of a score as being 1 to 20 or 1 to 18, but they don't add 20 to the dice. 20, which is a big deal, adds 5 to the dice. 13, which is just a little above average, adds only 1 to the die. So if I were, for instance, trying to lift something, I might be using a skill we call athletics. So in Dungeons & Dragons, in addition to these attributes, you have a set of skills. These are things that you may or may not be skilled and trained at, or may just have natural talent in because of your base attributes. So you'll notice just right in front of me here, that Lost Tom is pretty good at something called Arcana. That's sort of the knowledge that goes along with magic. This is an intelligence-based skill, which means it's getting the +3 that he gets from his intelligence. It's also, however, getting another modifier because he is proficient. So that means he's trained or skilled. And there aren't different levels of training or skill particularly. You're either proficient in something, which means you get your proficiency modifier, which goes up over time, and we'll teach you about that. Or you are an expert in it, and then you get your proficiency modifier twice. So there's not a lot of degrees of skill. You're either good at something naturally, you're good at something naturally, and you're trained at it, or you're especially trained. Nice and simple. So he is proficient at Arcana, and he has a high intelligence, and the net result is a 6. So I can actually do this now in the new D&D Beyond. If I wanted to roll a d20, you'll see I just rolled a 16 randomly out of 20, and his plus 6 gives me that 22. Thanks D&D Beyond for the new alpha of dice built right into the game. Certainly handy for this demonstration. Let's do one you're more familiar with. Let's say Lost Tom wanted to lift something, or he was arm wrestling. This will actually be kind of fun. So he wants to bust a door down. His strength is a 13. That gives him a modifier of +1. You don't have to worry now where that comes from. All the systems will take care of that for you. But will you know, he's a little above average on strength because he's even though he's an older guy, he's a trained adventurer. He's been out there for a while, but he's not trained in athletics. So he's only got a total of +1. So if he wanted to try to force a door, he'd be relying on whether his back was in the right position that day, whether the door was in good shape, and other factors that we represent with the roll of a die. And I'm going to roll a die, and I don't know what's going to get, and that says it's a 12. His 12 plus 1 is a 13. So a 13 is an okay result, as you can guess, because it's above a 10, but it's not a great result. Chances are he wouldn't knock down a door. We'll teach more about how you find those targets later, but sometimes he's going to get lucky, and his strength is going to be enough. So there's just let's just take a step back at that. Your character has a lot of things about them. The screen looks a little bit cluttered, but at the base, what Dungeons & Dragons is doing is giving you a chance to roll dice, which represent randomness, but to give those dice modifiers to represent that you've got some base skill. The world isn't completely random. Because it's a game, you'll notice that the degree of randomness is much higher. It's not, that you have a skill from 1 to 20, and if your skill is high, you're rolling a 1d4 to see the random. It is, you've got maybe +1 to +5, or maybe you've got, a big +8 in something you're really good at. So that 20 makes a difference. How you do on that rolling that 20 makes a difference. There you have just the most basics of the core of Dungeons & Dragons. Almost everything you do in a Dungeons & Dragons game is based on things like this D20 system for your skills and your abilities, or it's based on storytelling. It's based on people talking together. So if you haven't played Dungeons & Dragons, you may have watched it. Let's say you haven't watched it either. It consists of a bunch of people sitting around a table, virtual or literal, with one of them acting as what's called the Dungeon Master. They're not in charge of the people. They're directing the movie. They represent, they control the world of the story, and each of the people controls their character. I think that's pretty neat. So you get a group of people sitting around a table, and let's say I'm playing Lost Tom, and someone else is the Dungeon Master. And I don't say, I want to roll Arcana, hopefully. I say, do I know what those runes mean? Do I know what their placement might be about on this altar? And the Dungeon Master would say, well, let's find out. You're a wizard. Let's see what you know. So feel free to make an Arcana check. He'd tell me to make an Arcana check. I would do this, or some version of it, rolling a D20 and adding my Arcana. Ooh, that's only an 11. So in this case, whatever those runes were, Lost Tom hadn't seen them before. He doesn't know. It's a pretty low result. And we move on. What happens now that I don't know? And maybe the answer is that someone else who isn't magically trained but has some history, maybe someone who knows a little bit more about the world, a little bit more about magic, makes a check, possibly with a different target number. And let's imagine that they, I only rolled a 4 here, but let's imagine that they rolled an 18 and they had a +1. They would be, through history, know something that this great wizard didn't know. So we're going over, that's where the story, the roles come in. But the game is really about, well, do we touch the altar? Do we just ignore it and move on to the next part of the tunnel? Do we think there's something bad about it and we want to break it? Do we think maybe someone needs it? Maybe there's clues that we want to investigate. Maybe we're down here for a reason and we're supposed to recover something from the altar. So you're starting to tell a story together. And the story doesn't need the dice to roll. I think good D&D games, they certainly don't, rely on combat all the time. You shouldn't be in combat constantly in a good story, but you also don't need to be rolling dice constantly. You are telling a story together, and I'm going to talk about what my character would do. The person next to me is going to talk about what their character would do. The person next to them is going to talk about what her character would do, and we're going to tell a story as a group. It's improvisational and it's collaborative. You can't win Dungeons and Dragons. You're not playing against the people around the table with you. You're not even playing against the Dungeon Master. The Dungeon Master also wants you to have fun. Just like a video game, the monsters have to be hard to beat or else it's not very exciting. In a role-playing game, the monsters have to be hard to beat. The puzzles have to be hard to solve. Everyone's there to have fun. The victory condition is not gaining a level. The victory condition is not beating an opponent. There is no opponent to beat. The victory condition is everybody having a good time. And that means it's my job not only to make sure that I get to do cool stuff in the game, but as a player to make sure everyone else gets to do cool stuff and that their character gets to have a moment in addition to, or maybe instead of my character having a moment, because fundamentally Dungeons & Dragons is played in a group of people who are a party. They are a group, a team, a family of adventurers. And that, I think, is one of the great things about the game. So if you've never played before, and you're trying to think, well, what are all these numbers, and what do I need to know what my armor class is, and do I need to know what my wisdom is, and what does it matter that my wisdom is, and what is the difference between Ray of Frost and Witch Bolt? It's not that important. It's going to be part of the game because it gives the game a structure, but the thing that you need to imagine when you imagine a game of Dungeons & Dragons is a bunch of friends sitting around a table, eating pizza and Reese's Pieces like an E.T., and telling a story together. And they're each taking the part of one character, and they're doing a thing together. So those are some of the fundamentals of Dungeons & Dragons. One of the things I'm going to try to do here on this show in the future is I'm going to talk through creating different kinds of characters, making certain choices that you make when you make a character, and how they might impact something in the game. So in future sessions, I might show you what it's like to roll up a wizard and how that's different from rolling up a sorcerer, or help you understand what the different classes are like so that you can decide which one you want to play, and then walk you through what it's like to create a character yourself. I might create some characters along the way, but ultimately it's so that you'll see how easy it is to create your own character. And once you've created a character, you will find that you sort of know more what to do with it. Just like with a lot of board games, once you've set up the game, you kind of have seen all the pieces and seen all the cards, and you kind of get a sense of what the game is going to play like. So I hope you'll stay tuned to this channel. These will get longer. This is definitely an off-the-cuff practice session for me to get used to my new setup and all this cool wood that I've got around me in this little box that I live in. But ultimately, I'm going to be here about once a week. Every other week I'll be trying to teach you a little bit about how easy it is to play Dungeons & Dragons, and then every other Saturday evening at a time still to be announced, me and 4 or more heroes will be gathering to explore a new world and probably save it from danger. In the meantime, check out my stuff. I guess I should do this. I got to get used to this. So if you look up, there it is, over there on the far corner, you'll see fourth.me/Patreon. That's a page on my website that explains the Patreon and some of the cool D&D and board game related stuff that you can get from me. There's also at Fourth Place Games. That is good on both Instagram and Twitter. That's a great place to follow for little bits of news and a taste of what I'm doing. You can also follow me specifically at, where we go? There we go, that guy there, Ian Struckhoff. That's also good on Instagram and Twitter. That will give you just more of a view into my life. More of a personal take on things. There's a lot of overlap because this business is my business. It is my job. It is my life. And it is my life because it's my passion to do these things and to share them with people. So I get pretty excited. Other than that, stay tuned. Subscribe to this channel, or at least follow it, so that you start to hear more when these heroes start to show up real soon now. It's been great being here with you all virtually. Thank you for putting up with first-time streamer tongue-tiedness. I look forward to streaming a lot more with you guys. Thank you.